What's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 26 of Destination Talk. I'm John Paz.
And I am Harry, and we are coming to you from Chop Studios, located at 750 Route 34 in Mattawan, New Jersey. And thank you to our show sponsor, the Academy in Garwood. To set up your free class, you can reach them at 908-540-6936. Today, we are joined by Rob Liddell, Director of Pro and Prospect Development at Goalie Mentors and the U.S. Goalie Scout for the Chilliwack Chiefs. We are diving into the growth of USA hockey, the rise of talent in non-traditional markets, and what it takes to develop elite goaltenders today. Rob, thank you for being a part of the show. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Well, we appreciate you coming on. And Rob, can you just give us a little bit more of a background as to, how you got into the sport and the role you have today?
Yeah, honestly, it's probably a pretty long story. I'll try to keep it short. I started playing roller hockey, and just a friend of mine that got me into it. And was playing defenseman, used to block a bunch of shots, and then of course I ended up getting stuck in the net. They're like, "Hey, do you want to put the gear on?" So I started playing goalie and roller hockey, and then that same friend started playing ice hockey, and it was just like house level type stuff. And so then I was, everybody needs a goalie, right? Especially on a house team. So then I kind of got recruited for that, and then that kind of grew into playing travel hockey. And I started pretty late. I think I was probably 13 or 14 before I was really even playing travel hockey, not just local house level stuff. So never really played AAA. Tried out a few times. Had a tryout with junior B for a local junior B team in Canada. After I aged out of 18U, and then I ended up playing some ACHA hockey at Eastern Michigan. Got my teaching degree there, and then always had a passion for coaching. And I had worked at summer camps when I was younger, just trying to be like a camp counselor and, the guy in pads that's helping demonstrate drills. And that kind of, I guess, over time morphed into being somebody who then was going out to practices and working with kids one-on-one after I was done playing. It just kind of built itself from there kind of organically, honestly, brick by brick, a little bit at a time. And, it's been graduated from college in 2012. And so I've at least been coaching probably since 2011. So this is year almost 15 for me of coaching in some way, shape, or form. And now it's been my full-time job now. I think I quit my corporate job in 2017. So this is all I do. This is what I do for a living. I'm on the ice, all the time in the trenches with the goalies, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Where are you from originally?
Detroit area.
Okay.
What we call the east side here of Detroit. So probably, an hour-ish north of the city.
So very close to the Canadian border up in that area.
Yeah. Yep.
So you said you got started a little bit late. That is kind of late for hockey. Were you involved in any other sports prior to that?
Typical stuff. Baseball, soccer, a little bit of football, nothing major. I would say I was the biggest into baseball and soccer growing up, and then it was baseball and hockey. And then my parents didn't realize that being 5'10" and stocky was not a good goalie build, so they let me choose playing goalie instead. I think I would have been a really good DH. I could hit the ball really hard, and I don't run very fast, so I would have been a great DH. But they let me choose my own path, and I fell into it, fell in love with it. Here I am.
So can you talk a little bit about your coaching philosophy over the years? You said you started in 2017 to now. Can you talk a little bit about how it's kind of built into where the coaching life is now for you?
Yeah, I've always been somebody who tried to build relationships with people, especially when I was younger. And anytime you're just starting out, you're kind of going up against other more experienced coaches. And so I think, I don't know that I ever had any real advantage over anybody, but I guess if I had one, it would have been just being somebody who was willing to invest in other people. I always wanted to be somebody that they could lean on and that really cared, that just not because I was trying to go above and beyond, but just because that's how I knew how to do the job. For me, that's the part about it that I enjoy, is building the relationships with the kids, watching them grow, watching them achieve their goals, achieve their dreams. So for me, I would say that's the core foundation of anything that I do in terms of philosophy. Is just it has to start with the relationship. The technical stuff is great. I've certainly learned a lot and continue to grow every year and learn things from other people. But if you don't have a relationship with somebody, I think that none of that matters. So.
Mhm.
No, I would agree with that. And I, in my space of working with athletes myself, I always tell the families that it's I'm not just working with your son or daughter. This is a process that includes all of us, and you have to be, bought into it, and you have to be uh, involved in this, in what we're doing, because if everyone's not bought into it, you're not going to see the success that they should be having. And I guess that might tie into my next question is then what helps to continue to keep you motivated in this space that you find yourself?
I mean, man, I don't know if it's stupidity or obsession, but it's just
Yeah, I
I
kind
just
of feel the same way
know
sometimes.
I don't know if I'm a glutton for punishment or if I just am obsessed with it. Quite frankly, I think when I was younger, I had like this. Uh, it was certainly about the players for me, and I think there was a period of time for me where I started to have some success, and then it kind of became about me. Like I had the chip on my shoulder. I had some things I felt like I had to prove to the world, kind of thing.
Right.
Um, and then I went through some life experiences during the pandemic, and it kind of I had to refocus on what my initial vision was, what my initial why was, and that was it's always got to be about the players for me. So that, to be honest with you, that's what keeps me going. It's not really like I've won a couple national championships at the youth level. That's not like it's great, but then when it's over, it's if that's all you're relying on, I think it leaves you pretty empty. So for me, it really is. It has to be about the players. It has to be about their stories, the relationships you build with their families. Like I have a responsibility and an obligation to do my best for them, and that's what gets me out of bed every day. That's what drives me to try to learn more, to try to be better. Because I think if it's about any of that other stuff, then you just don't make it. You fizzle out pretty quick.
Do do you see it as an extension, like they become a part of your extended family?
Yeah, 100%. Before I had kids, I called them my kids sometimes.
Right.
You know, like, hey, these are like my guys, or whatever. Like that's for me. It's before I had kids. I think all I did was spend time at the rink.
Right.
On the weekends, you're going to watch them play, and to the point that like my wife would be like, they'll be all right if you're not at one game, and I'm like, no, like I have to be there. Like
Mhm.
this kid's playing, and then this kid's on this team, and they're playing this team, and then you're like at the rink for 7 hours, and you just constantly feel like it's never enough, and then you're watching stuff on your phone
Right.
while you're also watching stuff on your laptop, like you're trying to pay attention to everybody, you know, because you want to see everybody do well. And I think I have some of the earliest pictures I have with my son are like me on the laptop watching guys, and I'm like rocking him and feeding him with a bottle. Like it's just yeah, I would agree with that. I think
I can certainly relate with that, especially during the college football season when
Mhm.
I've got the laptop, I've got the tablet, I've got the phone, and my wife will come into the room. She just shakes her head because she knows that this is what I feel like I need to do because I want to show my support to my players if I can't physically be there. So I understand
yeah.
exactly what you're saying.
So, can we talk a little about USA Hockey? So, the rise of USA Hockey, it's really made a lot of strides in the world stage over the years. What do you think has driven the growth of USA Hockey over the past decade?
It's hard to say, quite frankly, but I'd like to think that it's. I think you touched on it earlier. I think we're seeing more players make it from non-traditional markets. It used to be Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Michigan rate the three M's. And as somebody who works and lives in Michigan,
Mhm.
it's certainly not the three M's anymore. I think we still do move players on. We do a good job, but I don't know if it's a level of resources other places, or if it's investment from NHL clubs in terms of starting youth organizations and other places. You look at like Arizona, St. Louis, just as two examples, which you would call maybe non traditional hockey markets. Like it's insane how many kids are coming out of St. Louis now. It's crazy how many kids are coming out of Arizona now. And the East Coast has always been great, but I feel like anytime you have like even the expansion of the NCDC, that's become a very reputable league for goalies in particular. Like obviously I just deal in goalies, but so I think anytime you're talking about providing more opportunities, specifically in my space, to kids who often need a little bit longer to develop, you're not dealing with guys who peak at 18, right? Yeah, they need until about 23, 24, 25 to really peak. It's all about finding them places to play where they can get games and they can get experience. So I think from that perspective, from a goaltending perspective, I think it's the growth of the game in general, and having these guys have more resources. I mean, obviously, specifically with USA Hockey, when you talk about Steve Thompson, like he's one of the best people on the planet. It's no surprise to me why if that's who's leading USA goaltending. You're seeing more success in that area. But I think in general, it just seems like, particularly with the growth of the skill in the USHL. I mean, I worked in the North American League a couple times when I was younger. I had the opportunity to work with Muskegon 2 seasons ago in the USHL for like the back end of the season. And it's not that I was surprised at the skill level, but I was just like, man, like you don't realize, you don't see it on NHL Network. It's not like promoted like the CHL is. I feel like you don't realize just how good some of those guys are. And we had 2 first-rounders on that Muskegon team, Matt Vigrid and Sasha Boisvert, and I was honestly in awe pretty much every day. Like Matt Vay would always be out there tipping pucks and doing extra work, and Sasha is always out there early and staying late working on a shot. Like you don't really get exposed to that because it's the USHL,
right?
Versus the CHL. And so I'd have to imagine that plays a big role. The skill level is insane. If you've ever had an opportunity to go to a USHL game, I would encourage you to do so if you're not somebody who's super into hockey, because it's like, wow, man, these guys are good. You just don't realize how fast and how skilled these players are. And so that's who we're moving up, right? We're moving up. Obviously both of those guys were, imports that I mentioned, but you've got guys like David Klee that are born and bred here and that are, homegrown US guys that are really, really, really good players. He was the captain of that team this year when they won the Clark Cup. He's an incredible guy, incredible player. So I feel like I would imagine the growth of the league and the growth of hockey in some of those non-traditional markets, and seeing those kids have those opportunities to play and grow, or maybe those were kids who didn't play hockey before. Maybe those kids who were kids who played other sports. So.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Arizona, and this may be a tough question to kind of answer, but you look at a player like Austin Matthews, who's from Arizona, currently with the Toronto Maple Leafs. If hockey doesn't go to Arizona, does Austin Matthews fall in love with the sport? Was he destined to possibly be there regardless? But, the game may have lost out on a great talent if the sport doesn't go to Arizona. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think that, to your point, if he's not exposed to it, how do you know if you like it or not? Right? If you don't have the opportunity to play, how do you know if it's something that you're even interested in? I think a guy like that, a player like that, is good at whatever sport they play. There's a couple of those in my lifetime that I've worked with, and it's just like they happen to fall in love with hockey and be obsessed with hockey. But that player, with his frame and his size and his mentality and the work ethic and the level of just athletic skill, you put them into pretty much any sport, like even if it's not their ideal sport, they're going to find a way to be a pro at that sport. Mm-hmm. So I agree with that. I think that that's someone who we're fortunate that they liked hockey, because now we get to watch them at the NHL level. And obviously he's pretty impressive. I'm a lefty, so I watch a lot of Austin Matthews. Like when I'm like trying to teach myself how to shoot, when I'm trying to like trying to improve myself personally, I'm a big Austin Matthews guy. So.
Well, the game of hockey it's an amazing sport. I was exposed to it when I turned 5. My dad introduced me to it, as a fan, and I have been and will be till the day I die a New York Rangers fan. But I know you laugh. You and your Devils over there. Yep. But but it's an amazing sport. I don't think people truly understand how much skill and speed is involved in the game, especially when you look at the size of these guys on the ice rink they play on. Because compared to an international rink, the NHL rink is much smaller, and the fact that these guys are able to move the way they do is amazing. And then, so I'll transition into what is it, from the goalie perspective, because that's your forte. What are you looking for in a younger player from the goaltender position?
I'd say in general, I think in North America, it seems like we are looking at kids who are overly developed, and that's, I think, a mistake. I think that you're not looking for the best 15-year-old in terms of technical ability. Like, I really like to try to look at someone who we know has the athletic base and a certain amount of size. Like, I'm 5'10", so sizes and everything. So before everybody comes after me for only being worried about big goalies, that's not what I'm talking about. It's like,
Right.
you have to, size is relative to skill, right? So if you have someone who is of a decent size and they're a good athlete, and they have a good foundation, but maybe the technical pieces are slightly missing. Like, I'd rather have someone like that. I can add those technical pieces. Like, I can build a relationship with that player, and I know that I can teach them some of the finer details, but the base, I think, has to be there, because at the end of the day, that's what you're going to fall back on. You look at some of the saves last night in the Stanley Cup final, they weren't pretty. Some of them weren't pretty, but they were big time saves. And to me, someone's athleticism, their ability to just figure it out, that's where that comes from. And then they learn the technical stuff after the fact, versus I feel like sometimes we can get wrapped up in how technically sound someone is, but if all
Right.
they have is that technical base, and they don't have the other piece of it, they can really struggle when you need that big save, or the play is broken, or things break down in front of them. They don't have that A to B answer. They're not able to paint outside the lines, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, as I've gotten older, I think I value that a lot more. I think I value just the natural athleticism and someone who's willing to learn versus someone who's overly technical at an early age.
You do touch on something, though, because you hear when you're watching NHL games the size of the goaltender as far as height goes. And that is, whether we like it or not, is a factor that is determined. You're seeing a lot of goaltenders that are over 6'2", 6'3", because scouts feel that they can cover more of the net. So how do you overcome that stigma to a guy like yourself? You're 5'10", I'm 5'9". How do you come over that, even with the skill set?
I mean, look at UC Saros. Okay,
Right.
He's an incredible goalie. Shishurkin, I don't know what he's listed at, but I feel like he's right around 6'6.5", maybe
Right.
6'1". Like, he's an incredible goalie. So their skill shines through, right? So I work with a goalie named Cooper Black. He's currently under contract with the Panthers. He plays for the Charlotte Checkers right now, and he's 6'9". He's 7 feet tall on skates. Cooper is not good because he's 6'9". He's good because he's a good goalie.
Right.
And it's easy to say, oh, well, yeah, he made it because he's 6'9". No, go watch the guy play. He moves, he skates, his edges are incredible. He's had to learn to simplify his game. So the bigger guys, the big athletic guys, especially guys like Cooper, guys like a Markstrom, when you're talking about that size, it's almost a detriment to them sometimes. Like, you walk in and they look good, like, oh my God, this guy's so big, they fill so much net. But if they don't know how to use that size to actually stop pucks, it becomes an issue. A smaller guy, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a disadvantage, especially when you're talking about low plays underneath the slot. There's so much wasted coverage above the crossbar.
Right.
For someone who's 6'4 plus, 6'5 plus, that it's actually harder for them to learn to just be boring and fill that space. So I think there's advantages and disadvantages, and it's all I try to relate to guys. I've had a handful of guys play, at the next level that are smaller. A guy like Blake Patilla, who played for Michigan Tech for years, was a Richter finalist. He's 5'10 and a quarter, man. Like, he's 5'11", was an incredible college goalie. So just because you lack that size of being over 6'2", or we like to call it pro size, right? If you lack pro size, that's fine, but you make up for it with pro details, athleticism, skating, post work, being able to read plays, being able to watch a puck really well. I think those are things that you control, those controllables, and you have to be obsessed with that part of the process, because you can't control the fact that you're not gifted with height.
Mm-hmm. You talk a little bit about like what your personal approach is when working with goalies at Goalie Mentors.
Yeah, I think you're custom tailoring it to each individual person.
Mm-hmm.
For me, like, there's a core foundation that everybody has to have. You have to be a good puck tracker. You have to be able to skate. You have to understand mechanics to a certain degree, but everybody's body is slightly different. Every goalie is slightly different dimensions. This guy has long legs. This guy has long arms, right? Like, that changes the way they get into their hips or the way that their stance looks. So you're not trying to make everybody look the same. I'm trying to help each person find what works for them, but also use like the core foundational knowledge I know to be true. So, hey, I know this works for most guys. If you're a hair this way or a hair that way on your push line back toward the post, you're probably fine.
Mhm.
Hey, you have longer legs than most goalies, so you can be a little wider here. Maybe you need to be a little wider and lower here, because if you're too narrow, you can't get down to the ice. Guys are just going to expose your 5-hole. Or hey, because your legs are so long, maybe play a little bit deeper if you feel more comfortable in that wider stance. I know you guys had DK on. That was always something that we always went back and forth on. It's a big athletic man. That's like, he's walking around at 6'5", 250 right now. He does not look 250. Like, that's
Right.
a big athletic dude. You're teaching him to play different than you're teaching somebody like a Blake Patilla or a Cooper Black. They're all different people. And so I think the interesting and fun part of the job is getting to know each of them for who they are, then getting to know each of them for how they play, and then being able to take like the vision in my head and marry that to how they feel on the ice. Because I'm not in the earpiece in their ear, right? I can't tell them everything to do. I have to hopefully take the knowledge in my brain and translate that to them in a way that makes sense.
You bring up Dylan. Dylan was a guest on the show previously. So you look at him, he comes from a Division III school. He's a backup for most of the time, and then finds himself all the way up at the AHL level, one step away from a goalie getting hurt and playing in the NHL. So how do you what advice can you offer to those guys out there that may have found themselves in Dylan's situation to continue to grind away, never knowing if that opportunity would come?
I think that it's easy to look at a guy like Dylan and call it luck or just that's such a one-off. But there's a story like that every year to me. There's a goalie every year, it feels like, at the pro level who just like comes out of nowhere. Somebody who's been waiting for their opportunity forever and capitalizes on it. So I think that Dylan's story is one of perseverance. I knew him from probably by the time he was maybe 21, 22. Like, he was already at Adrian by the time we really got to know each other.
Right.
But he was also humble and coachable and willing to change and willing to adapt. And it wasn't always easy for him, but I think he understood. He had a certain amount of confidence in his own ability, but he also understood that he was behind in terms of when he started and how he started, similar to myself. And he was always willing to try to improve, whether that meant improving himself off the ice, whether that meant cutting a little more weight than he was comfortable with, trying to show up in a little bit better shape every year. There's no discounting the work ethic. And so I think it is that simple. I know maybe that's cliche, but there's no secret sauce. There's no magic potion that these guys take. It's work. He's in the gym every day, 6 days a week. He's on the ice 2 to 3 days a week, sometimes with me, sometimes going and being willing to take shots from AHL and NHL guys and feel uncomfortable and feel like he's in the deep end. But like, hey, if I want to play at that level, I've got to figure this out.
Right.
He's also just like a really good person, right? He's somebody that you root for. And I think that goes a long way too. When you put that good energy into the universe, I think good things come back to you.
No, we had a fun time interviewing.
Oh yeah, that was a great one.
Yeah, we had a good time with that one.
So from your perspective, how important is structured training versus playing in a ton of games?
I think it depends. It's cyclical. Like, for younger kids, I'm not a fan of like summer hockey.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I'm also not a fan of being on the ice all the time. So people would say, "Oh yeah, you don't want them to play summer hockey because you want them to come trade with you and pay you money. That's what you do for a living." It's the opposite. If I don't have enough players that I'm working with in the summer to make a living, that's a me problem. That's not a 9-year-old kid problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, you don't make the brick team, or you do make the brick team. It doesn't mean you need to be on the ice the entire summer. Like, that's how you burn your kid out. So I think early on, it has to be about let them play other sports, do other things, developing their overall athletic base, what they do in a lot of other countries. There's I don't know if it's Norway or it's Sweden. I'm going to sound stupid because I don't know how to quote it properly, but it was like a country, one of the Nordic countries has like the highest per capita Olympians compared to their regular population. And when you look at like what they do with these kids, they don't specialize until they're 14, 15, or 16 years old. Mm-hmm. They like refuse to let them specialize. They place them in a bunch of different sports and they just like see what the kid's best at. And then at a certain point, then they kind of Olympic track them in whatever sport they fit in. can't remember if that's Finland. I'd have to go look it up to really be able to articulate, but I've always been like, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. Like, how does that one country have the most Olympians of anybody, like per capita? Like, how do they do that?
Yeah, what do they do?
They're the Olympic medals. Yeah, what are they doing? They're not pushing kids into this box. So, as somebody who works in youth sports a lot, and I feel like a hypocrite talking about the professionalization of youth sports, but like I am trying to do the opposite. I don't want kids to come train with me year round. I want them to go be kids. And then when they're 13, 14, 15, if they love hockey and they're hitting puberty and they're hitting that stride, like, and you want to focus a little more, okay, let's talk about what that looks like. You should still play other sports. Some of my best athletes right now still play other sports to this day. And at a certain point, then they decide, probably maybe junior year, senior year of high school, okay, hey, maybe I should rest. Maybe I should spend that extra season instead of playing lacrosse or soccer. Maybe I should spend that in the gym, trying to shift my focus a little bit more. And so when it comes down to that, I think we have this unhealthy obsession with game count. Youth hockey, AAA hockey, everyone's trying to max out the game count all the time. And that's fine if that's all it was. But then it's summer hockey. It's this tournament. It's, hey, let me go play here. Let me go do this. Especially if you're a good goalie. Like, you're probably the best goalie that almost everybody knows. So they want you to come play for every summer team. Like, you got 5 different summer teams you got to go play for. Your kid never gets a break. And so I would always, like, don't even spend that money with me. Go get in the gym. Go get in the gym with DK. Go get in the gym with whoever your trainer is. Like, go work out. Do it something different.
Right.
That's going to help you long term. So that's the way I've always seen it. And I think that shifts as they get a little bit older.
I think Dylan said the same thing in his podcast. Not having kids on the ice all the time, like go out and do stuff not on the ice. He said the exact same thing you said.
And I do agree too, because that's I want to say a challenge that I see is that, and we'll use hockey as an example, that you don't get better by playing 200 games. You get better by training off the ice, doing your dry land training, working on your footwork, your skill work, getting stronger, and then that's where your development comes, and then you're able to then apply it to the games. I've used the term for many years now that a lot of these kids are professional amateurs, and they feel, maybe not so much them, but the parents feel that if their kid is not playing, they're going to lose their spot. And I think that's, and it kind of leads into the question I have here too regarding burnout, is that I think we're going to lose more kids along the way because they just don't take enough time to be kids. And we as coaches have to work to change this, because if we don't, this is why we're seeing all these injuries. This is why we're seeing, I played baseball, and you're hearing stories about 11 and 12-year-olds having Tommy John surgeries. That shouldn't be happening, at that age. It's just ridiculous in my mind. So I'll follow up with, what advice do you give to your players or to their families regarding burnout? Have you encountered that in your realm, and do you talk about that?
Yeah. I'll quote a specific circumstance that came up a few weeks ago, and I won't use the kid or the family's name just to try to, they'll know if they watch that we had this conversation. But have a player who unfortunately had a hip surgery last year, who's a high school player, and it's a certain amount of the way their hips are shaped, but it's also an overuse injury, right? And this is a player who also started later too. It's not like someone who's specialized in goaltending since they were 9 years old, has played AAA hockey their whole life. So it's kind of a unique circumstance in that. So they had the surgery, rehab, come back, have a great season. Just signed with the junior team, hasn't been announced yet. And, the dad's like, hey, what do you think about doing this, like local summer league? And my exact words were, hey, like his history, dealing with what he dealt with last year, like, no, like I don't want to be that guy, but no, like I want him on the ice as little as humanly possible. This offseason, we know where we're going. We know what the goal is. We've already signed, put the training camp date on the calendar. We're ramping into training camp now. It has to be a completely different mentality.
Right.
Like, wow, who cares how you look in June and July? You need to be ready at the end of August when you show up. It's your first year of junior. You have to pop then. So how do we do that? We should be in the gym I know some people don't like the term prehab, but doing the prep work, doing the body work, the rehab work, the recovery work to make sure that you feel great anytime you touch the ice. It has to be purposeful, whether that's with me or with somebody else. This player who lives a little bit of ways from me, so they train with another coach as well. Okay, if you're going to go get on the ice with them, awesome. But like that should maybe be 1 to 2 times a week at this point. Once a week for a month is great for me. Like, why are we training just to train? So I feel like I've always tried to instill that mentality. But then you do have some younger kids who love it and they're obsessed with it and they do want to be on the ice all the time. Their parents feel like they're missing out. I had a very similar conversation, with one of like 9, 10-year-olds that I work with. The dad's like, how do I keep him off the ice, man? Like, this is all this kid wants to do. And I'm like, dude, I know that it's hard, but you like have to just say no to people. You have to say no. Like, my kid doesn't need to do this tournament, or hey, we're busy, or make yourself the bad guy. Like, I'm never going to tell you how to parent your kid, but you have to protect them from that. We absolutely do. I think we do as coaches, but especially now as somebody who has 2 kids myself, like that's the advice I always try to give to parents is like, it's your job to protect your kid as much as you can from the business of hockey.
Right.
It's also my job to give you good advice. And anybody who tells you you have to do this or you have to do that, I think we do a really good job in this industry of creating that fear of missing out for parents, because there is such a business involved in summer hockey. And some of these tournaments may be great exposure for kids, but there's so many of them that it's really hard to tell which. And so you have these parents who are well-meaning and they want to take their kid to everything they can to help them get better, when in reality they're doing the opposite. Like we talked about, we're putting them in an environment where they're never away from the rink. They're never out of the gear. They never miss it. So I kind of just say good. Like when I have a parent that calls me and says, man, like I can't, like this is their month off the ice. Can we book something for July? It's going to be their first time back in 4 weeks. I'm like, good. Well, he's really going to struggle. It's going to be a tough, good. Like,
right.
Yeah, well, he's really missing the rink. He wants to be back on the ice. Good. Like that's what you want. You want your kid to be like, hey, when can I get back out there? Because if they're not, and you're the one driving the bus as a parent, that's a problem. Mm-hmm. The kid has to be the one driving the bus.
I agree.
They should be wanting to go to the rink, begging to go to the rink, begging to go to training. Like you're spending that money. If they don't feel that way, hey, maybe we need to back off. Maybe we need to do something else for a while. And then if they start bugging you again, hey, like, can I get back on the ice? Can I go skate again? When can I get back to training? Now oh, okay, they must actually really love it.
So can we talk a little bit about, you said how Massachusetts, Minnesota, Michigan have been the big market for hockey. Now Arizona, other places like Nashville or Dallas, St. Louis, like you said. How has the growth of hockey in those markets changed what you see from a scouting perspective and development standpoint?
I'll tell you, I watched a lot of prep school hockey, scouting for Muskegon. Now, obviously, it's a little bit different with the BCHL. We don't have a draft where I'm looking at guys with junior experience. So I'm looking at guys in other Canadian junior leagues, North American League, even USHL players who you're trying to see, are they potentially happy with their situation? How many games did they play last year? Are they someone who's ready to be a starter? Like it's obviously different depending on where your team is at with their cycle, what type of goalie you need. You already have an experienced guy. Are you looking to pull in on a younger guy to gain that experience? But when I was scouting for Muskegon 2 seasons ago, I watched a lot of prep school hockey. We had a goalie at the time who was in the system, Stephen Peck, who was a draft pick, who was on the team this past season. And he came from Avon. There were a handful of other prep school goalies that I really, really liked. And it's kind of funny, like it's the lower game count, like type season. They play 30 games. It's more of like a true high school or even a college season. So and obviously that's an East Coast thing, right? I did obviously watch a handful of Minnesota high school goalies as well. I did also watch some other AAA kids too. I think it's you're trying to obviously find, when you're scouting 15-year-olds, it's a little bit of, when you're looking at a kid for phase one, it's like, okay, who's potentially going to be ready for the league in a few years? So it's a different mentality. So again, for me, I'm looking at in those shoes, who has a potential frame, who has the athletic base. It's regardless of where you're playing. Like, it can't be, oh, well, this kid played in this league, and because the leagues are completely different, right? Mm-hmm. Then when you're looking at potentially pulling a guy in mid-year, let's say you need to make a goalie change, you're trying to compare their strengths of schedule versus somebody else's strengths of schedule. And ultimately, I think I always just continue to fall back on those things we discussed earlier. It has to be about athletic base and athletic foundation. Now, I would tell you that you'd be surprised where some of these kids play. Like I think St. Louis is a hub, like I talked about. There's a lot of kids on the West Coast who are very, very good goalies. There's kids from Europe who move over here to play youth hockey here, strictly to get more exposure, because physically sometimes it's hard to compare the league they're playing against in directly to the league they're coming into. So they'll come over here and play prep hockey or AAA hockey just to be closer to get that little bit different level of exposure. So I think that's completely changed the landscape. I also think that having video readily available totally changes your ability to scout kid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I can go on Instat and I can watch 20 of your games from last season, it doesn't matter to me where you play. Like if I can get a bigger sample size of you, I'm going to be more comfortable being like, yeah, that's my guy. Especially for me, it's like I'm not traveling around. I'm not in the rink every weekend. You know, sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. But it kind of depends on, especially when you work at the junior level, it's not like you have an NHL budget to go travel and watch these guys play all the time. Right. You're not on the road 200 days a year watching players to some extent. So it can be hard to, particularly if a player is in a non-traditional market, see them play or see them enough to feel like they're worthy of a draft pick or somebody that you can like put your stamp on. So I think video is invaluable, and I think the growth of how much more popular video is, especially, I think has been great for some of these players because now they have this level of exposure that they've never had before.
Going slightly back to what we were talking about before, because I would like to get your opinion on this. Do you feel NCAA hockey gets it right in the sense that their games are Friday, Saturday, and/or Sunday, but then they have that time during the week to focus more on training compared to some of these Canadian leagues where they play almost a similar like NHL type schedule of travel?
It's tough. Like I've had guys play in the CHL. I've worked with goalies who won a Memorial Cup, you know, won a World Junior Tournament that played in the CHL. And so I think that, and that's certainly always kind of presented as the advantage. Hey, we're playing a pro schedule. NHL teams like this a little bit more. You know, that's kind of how it's when they're recruiting. That's certainly how it's presented. Now that I think there's less of a direct competition right now, CHL kids can go play NCAA.
Right.
I think it'll be interesting to see how that works. You know, some kids giving up a 55-game season to go play a 30-game season. I think we're going to find out, quite frankly, because I wish I had a better answer, but I think we're going to find out like how many of these players are able to translate now that they're playing against older players, but also playing less games, right? There's less of a sample for them. I do think that there seems to be, particularly with goalies, a pretty obvious development model. I think there's a reason why you see a lot of free agent goalies, you know, sign out of NCAA, whether that's AHL contracts, NHL contracts, and do pretty well because they do have that time to really develop, right? They're maybe not playing as many games at the NCAA level, but they're also getting a lot of training, particularly at a good program where you have a great goalie coach. But I have also seen, you know, guys do really, really well in the CHL playing 50, 60 games a year. I think it's a tough argument, man. And I wish I had a better answer, right? I think it's that similar argument we have where it's what's better for that particular player. Do I need to go play 50 games this year? Or am I somebody who needs to, you know, practice more? Am I somebody who needs some tweaks? Am I ready to really go to that level and play a 60-game season? So I almost feel like it's player by player.
No, and I would agree, but I think where the NCAA kind of gets a little bit of an advantage is that those guys get to be in the weight room a little bit more and have a little bit more of that balance between developing strength-wise and playing-wise, whereas some guys like in the CHL, not saying they're not getting in the weight room, but because they're playing a kind of an NHL schedule, they don't get as much time. So it is a debate as to what works out best. And with these guys now being able to drop down into the NCAAs, it will be interesting to see how it plays out over the next 5 to 10 years with development.
Yeah, I've had guys before tell me like, hey, if I had to do it all over again, I would have gone to school for 1 year, done nothing but work out, eat as much as I could, put on a bunch of weight, and then signed and went and then played all my games. Like I've had people, say that to me in the past, guys who played at the NHL level who are like advisors now, agents. And so I think everybody has their own take on it, but I certainly would agree with that. I think it would be really interesting to see, as the landscape has changed, what players decide to do, and then we'll see if that works out for them or not.
Mm-hmm. So what is one piece of advice you'd give a young goalie or a young hockey player in general?
Do I only get one?
You can get two.
You can give as many as you like.
As many as you want, yeah.
I think it's never as big as you think it is, right? Like, be where your feet are, be in the moment, and try not to get too wrapped up in well, this player's journey, or they're here, they're my age. Like, I think the more you can just focus on yourself and trying to get better every day, and understand that hockey is a thing that we do. It's not who we are, and it feels like that. It feels like, well, this is my entire identity. So if I'm bad at this, that means I'm a terrible person and I suck and I'm awful. I think a lot of goalies in particular really struggle with that. I know I certainly did. So I think trying to do other things and again, just focus on yourself and not be distracted by all these other things that we see either on social media or being jealous of our peers or other players. Like, everybody's on their own path, and the more you can focus on yourself and invest in your own journey, the simpler and easier things are going to be for you, as opposed to worrying about what everybody else is doing.
Mm-hmm. And then last question, Rob, then to the coaches out there at the lower levels, the youth levels, what advice could you give to them to help with the, not just the development of the players overall, regardless of what position they play?
I think kids are smarter than we give them credit for. And if you're not invested, they know that you're not invested. If you're somebody that is just there, they feel that. If you're somebody that actually cares about them, they feel that. If you're somebody that is there for your own selfish benefit, because this is now your second career and it's about you, they definitely feel that. So if you really care about developing players, you're developing people. You're investing in players as people first and foremost. And I think that the organizations you see that tend to produce the most players, I think, have really figured that out. They've really figured out on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, things are a little bit different year to year, but they've really figured out how to dig in and get the best out of kids. And I think you always do that by being 100% real with them. You don't always have to tell them what they want to hear. Quite frankly, it's going to be harder than they think that it's going to be. So the more honest you can be with kids and with parents, the better. And the more honest you can be with yourself, I think the better as well. Like, we're not always going to have good days. Some days you show up to the rink and you're having a tough day, but these kids don't know that. They don't know that you had a tough morning, whatever. You got to be able to wash it and show up and do your best for them, because I think that's the obligation we have as coaches. When you sign up and you say, yes, this is what I want to do, whether you're doing it professionally or you're a volunteer, that to me has to be what the focus is. It has to be about them and developing them as people, because otherwise, why are we doing it?
Mm-hmm. No, 100% agree. And Rob, that was, we really want to thank you for taking the time out of your day again. It was some very good content. And
I got one more thing.
Oh, go ahead, please.
So with the NHL final and NHL finals going on, one at the time of this recording is 1-1. Who do you think is winning the Stanley Cup?
Who do I think is winning? Who do I want to win? I just have to go with Edmonton. I have a tie there.
Mm-hmm.
One of my mentors, one of my closest friends in hockey, works for the Oilers. So I'm Oilers all the way. I was disappointed to see the game go the way it went last night.
That was a crazy game last night.
It was crazy. But yeah, I have to support my guys, so I got to stick with the Oilers.
Gotcha.
Well, I appreciate the honesty, because a lot of people would have taken the high road and just said, let it be a 7-game series and let it be great hockey. But I appreciate.
They won it last year.
Yes.
They've had enough. This is their third final in 3 years. Listen, there's some really great people, with the Panthers, I'm sure. But for me, you're asking me, hey, I got to go with the Oilers. We need to see McDavid lift the cup. We need to see Skinner. We need to see the redemption story from Skinner.
Right.
Finish it. I want to see that man win. And so I'm always a big fan of anytime somebody has an opportunity to really do something like that. Yeah, I'm pulling for those guys 100%.
I love it.
Well, appreciate the honesty, and once again, thank you so much, Rob, for being a part of the show. We appreciate the insight that you gave us, and we're sure our listeners out there in the hockey world will appreciate what you had to say. And with that being said, that is a wrap on episode 26 of Destination Talk with Paz and Harry. Until we see you again.